Welcome to this Hessian Scrum special. Doodsengel from South African black metal duo Untitled. Today we have a special guest, Yusaf Parvez, aka Mr. Fantastic, aka Mr. Fix-It, aka Vikotnik from Doradom, Ved Buens Ende and Dolvor Ens Naven, and a multitude of other bands.
You almost got all my aliases.
Almost.
Almost.
How are you doing?
Not too bad. Yeah, I guess the pandemic over here limits reality a bit, or it gives you a different reality anyway, So it's a lot of sitting at home and I guess restlessness in especially in relation to going out and doing your craft, I guess, being back on the road. Yeah.
And I mean, obviously it gives you a bit of time to work on some ideas though.
Yeah, it's dual in a way, on one side it gives you like a focus to produce new stuff, and the other thing is that being being away from the live scene really makes you re-enter that state of mind you had when you started playing, when there was no offers, in relation to your music making, because now there's obviously no offers of tours or festivals or concerts. Now you're kind of back to the bare bone of doing music, and so you have to be only driven through passion, because there's nothing exciting in the horizon anyway. So the music making has to be exciting in itself,
Yeah, it's sort of back to square one from when you first started. Or
exactly. So that feels good, because it gives you a lot of time to think, and now you're not thinking in regards to a public or practical issues like how to solve rehearsals in relation to get on the road on time, if we have enough merch, etc., etc. So none of those thoughts are present at the moment to kind of distract the quintessential thing behind this, which is obviously the art itself, the music making. So that feels pretty good, actually, to just go back into that state of mind where the only thing that's important is the actual creation.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, which brings me to a point. I mean, what initially led you to form Doradom?
Doradom was really just a side project to begin with, because me and Alvran, both of us had main bands. I had Ved Buens Ende already, and that was kind of my main band. And then Björn or Alvran, he had a project called Härfärd at the time. I don't think they ever came around to releasing anything, but so we had our own project each, but I guess we were both missing, because both those projects were a bit experimental, or he was more into Härfärd was more into the Viking kind of metal thing, whereas Ved Buens Ende, how that sounds like. So, and both of us, I guess we missed to play that kind of original raw black metal, and so we started this side project just to kind of get the opportunity to play something Darkthrone-esque again, because one has to remember that when we get our first record deals, and release our first albums in 95, we've already been doing this for years. So we never got to release an album in 91 or 92, when our style was quite similar to Darkthrone, and our progression, like not within this band obviously, or these bands, but in general, our music playing then, like in the early days when only the kind of first generation of black metal got their record deals, whereas us, the second generation, we hadn't really come to that point yet. So by 95, I guess a lot of us from my generation, we already kind of progressed a lot of musicians and left that raw original black metal sound behind already. So Dødheimsgard was kind of an opportunity to set the clock back a bit, so that you can bring a style you kind of practiced in 91, 92 and bring it into 95 and have the opportunity to kind of release a record with that style, because that was basically the style that got me into the genre, I guess.
Yeah. And I mean, that holds true for your first two albums, were very much more the sort of early second wave kind of sound.
Yeah, and I guess also the Monumental Possession album. Then we wanted to kind of go even further back, to thrash metal roots. It's still very black, but it has those connotations towards the nods, towards the thrash metal as well. And I guess it was quite important for us to kind of release a couple of albums, kind of pointing in the direction of our kind of where our metal was rooted in the first place, and then kind of paying your dues, I guess, and then venture off to more kind of personal territory in relation to sound and production.
Yeah, because even Monumental Possession had some very kind of strange riffs on them.
It does.
Well, there were a few sort of dissonant riffs that recall the more second wave sound.
Yeah. I think, when we had the material ready and recorded for Krone til Konge, before it was released, I've already made the songs for Satanic Art. I probably also already made quite a lot for 66 International already. So we were kind of ahead of time in that sense, that the 95 record really reflects, like I said, our 92, 91 kind of personas. Whereas when we eventually released that music in Krone til Konge, then we had already made music by then that progressed into new territory. So like I said, by 95, a big portion of Satanic Art and 66 Riffs were already kind of written and in the process of being written.
Yeah, because you took over guitars on Satanic Art.
Yeah. I did the drums for the couple of first records, and I guess the way we kind of worked on the two first records is that we went to the rehearsal place and everybody kind of contributed riffs, and so all that music is kind of put together in the rehearsals place, whereas in 97 and in relation to Satanic Art, that's kind of shifting, where I'm more and more tending to make the music by myself and then presenting it to the guys. Yeah. And that's kind of how it's been since then. So I guess the two first records are a more kind of an old school way of making music, that you all come together in the rehearsal place and you put that shit together with each other.
Yeah. So you kind of took it over as your sort of project from Satanic Art.
Yeah, I guess it wasn't that intentional. I guess it just, we needed to set the pieces, the strengths and weaknesses, and kind of embellish the strengths and hide the weaknesses, I guess, So, and Apollyon, he was a better drummer than I was at the time, So at least he had a lot more speed than I have, so it made sense to kind of to switch it around a bit. And I was probably the best guitarist within the band, so it was a bit stupid to place me behind the drums by then. It didn't really matter for the two first records who played what, in a sense, because they are so raw anyway, So, and they are not they're not supposed to sound professional, or they're not supposed to be technically challenging either to play or to listen to, you know. So, but you know, as the music grew more ambitious, then you kind of have to use the right assets in order to achieve the best possible version of that more ambitious sound, I guess, you know. So moving Apollyon to the drum kit and myself over to guitar, and then getting a second guitarist, and then, you know, letting Aldran focus on doing vocals and being a front man, you know, because I thought it felt a bit silly to tie him up, being like a really charismatic person, and you know, being focused on the voice, you can give 100%, but if you play guitar and do the vocals, then you have to share that percentage to each portion in a live setting, you know. So it was giving him the free hands to kind of be the front man, you know, and be the center of focus visually and yeah, in a performance. So and I think we got in Galder from Old Man Child, which we had known for years, so we knew he was a really solid guitarist, you know. So I guess at that time we really just wanted to piece together a band that could work on many levels, you know, not only producing music but also playing it thoroughly and professionally.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, another thing I noticed from Satanic Art onwards is the sort of long phrase tremolo riffs that you play that I've never heard any other band play. It's almost like, you know, sort of the long phrases you find in classical music, that type of thing.
Yeah, and I guess that's also my main inspiration for it, you know, like just trying to find something that doesn't really change after 16 beats, you know, or 4 bars or whatever, you know, but that kind of progresses into, you know, the highs and lows and into a climax before it starts again or enters into a new theme. So the kind of the classical music way of thinking structure was definitely in my mind and has been ever since, basically. Because there's something that with classical music and that kind of arrangements that's almost a narrative. It's not a riff in a sense. It's a story, you know. It's a riff. It has a certain amount of bars, you know, and but a riff that's seemingly never ending. It's kind of telling you something. It wants to bring you to some emotional state, you know, or a journey or a turmoil or something like that. So I guess that was what I felt when I listened to classical music, is that I didn't picture a guy playing a violin or a guy sitting by a piano. I pictured other things, you know, mental projections of, yeah, either it be nature or inner thoughts or depression or sadness, and that's what classical music drew out of me, and I really wanted to kind of put my metal music in that same kind of focus where you're kind of telling a story or offering an emotion to the listener.
Yeah, it makes sense, because I mean, Doradom has got a very sort of emotional impact to it, especially on the Umbra Mega album.
Yeah, I guess it's even more apparent there, because then I'm kind of know what I'm aiming for. You know, I think in the Satanic Art and 666 era, I'm thinking more portionally. I'm thinking that it has to be so and so much brutality. It has to be so much this and that, you know, and also we were young, so obviously we wanted to stick out. So that was also kind of a portion that's consciously put into the mold, you know. Whereas on Aumbra Omega, I'm kind of ridding myself of all those external thoughts, and I'm just thinking if everything has the right emotion. So my only filter for thinking if something on Aumbra was right or wrong was listening to it after I played it and see if I felt something. And if I didn't feel something, I threw out the theme and started again, you know. But if it gave me some certain emotion, or the song as a whole took me on a journey, that's what I wanted to achieve. So I went from kind of a very concrete tool set, adding on portions, you know, 20% of that, 30% of this, and into a very abstract mindset in making music. Because it all had to be evocative in the end. And that was kind of the main frame or the main mindset for making the album. I wanted every song in itself to be a short journey, and and the whole album to kind of be the whole story. Yeah. So that to do it, like I always said, you know, the best listen to that album is by yourself with headphones and take the time to listen to the whole record. You know, and it's not that kind of record you can put on while doing the dishes or cleaning your house, and it's not intended to be either. You know?
Yeah, I mean, because I've noticed when I've listened to it, there's, I mean, every song is great, but it's not the sort of album where you just put on an individual track and move on to the next thing. You know, it's an album that's best experienced as a whole. It kind of, from the start to the end, it almost narrates an entire story.
Yeah, and that was the ambition, you know. And I'm really glad when, you know, people caught on to that without me telling them. And so when we got the reviews, you know, in 2015, you know, I was very happy to read them, but because whether they liked it or not, their language was impacted by it. You know, they didn't write as they usually did, you know, like they didn't write like, yeah, this has some trash influences and then some black metal influences. So I noticed all the journalists writing on that album moved into a bit more abstract territory in doing their review as well. So, and that was quite a fun read to see that the musical content, it's not really easy to place it in relation to kind of genre or a very a direct language. So they had to kind of take it at use a more artistic language themselves to kind of describe what they were hearing. And that was quite enjoyable.
Yeah, I mean, if I had to compare it to anything, not really stylistically, but probably structurally, I would think like maybe 70s progressive rock bands like Van der Graaf Generator or something, you know?
Yeah, a few people have told me that before, that, you know, like structurally it has a bit in common with 70s, you know, prog rock bands and stuff like that. But the truth is I never listened to it. And with Ved Buens Ende as well, when we went to the studio to record Written in Waters, it was first time in a professional studio, you know, so we met the engineers for the first time and they listened to our music and they said, like, you guys, you're really into King Crimson, aren't you? And we're like, no, fuck, we never heard King Crimson in our lives, you know. So
yeah. Because when I listened to Ved Buens Ende as well, I also thought a lot of it has a sort of nod to King Crimson.
Yeah, like I said, by that time we hadn't even listened to King Crimson's, not knowingly anyway. So the engineer, he went home, and the next day he brought his King Crimson vinyls for us to hear. You hear? You're quite similar. You hear it? You hear it? So, but I guess, you know, it's maybe it's not. Maybe it's the mindset. You know, maybe it's the kind of mindset from both performers, being it Ved Buens Ende or King Crimson. You know, it's kind of a non-musical starting point, because we never made Ved Buens Ende to sound like a band. We made Ved Buens Ende to kind of create a world, you know, a world on its own. and a state of mind. And I guess that's what the prog bands of the 70s as well, they were more interested in exploring their own minds through music, I guess, which will make you sound very different to a band that says, yeah, let's do some dark tone black metal. Yeah, let's do that, because they have a really, really direct kind of source of inspiration. And that also has very kind of stringent parameters. If they aim to sound like a band, they have to kind of use a certain set of tools to achieve it. Whereas my bands, there's kind of no limitation to tools or anything, whatever kind of contributes to either the Dødheimsgard universe or the Ved Buens Ende universe, that's fine, whatever it is,
Yeah. And I mean, it's funny you should say that, because you can sort of draw those parallels from the early progressive rock, the sort of onset of it, to the early black metal scene, the early second wave, because none of those bands sounded the same. It wasn't like a sort of unified style. Everything sounded different. Doradom didn't sound like Dark Throne didn't sound like Satyricon didn't sound like Thorns or Mayhem or anyone.
Yeah, I think since this style, black metal, and when I talk about black metal, I'm not talking about 2000s black metal, but the black metal scene, especially pertaining to the early 90s. Since we didn't have anything external, there were no record labels interested, at least initially, and when they got interested, they just got interested in one or two bands, like Mayhem or Dark Throne, or those were good signings. But so everything was self-generated in a way, it was the tape trading community. You sat and wrote letters by hand, and you taped your stuff on a cassette, and you sent it to this guy, and this guy sent you his bands and all, and stuff like that, And I think all of us were quite happy in that state, because there were no distractions. There were no kind of like I said, hopes of getting a record deal or playing a festival or something like that. So nobody had started thinking or doing compromises yet. Nobody had started thinking like, in order to get shows, maybe we should sound a bit more like this band or that band, So everybody was quite content in their own little world. And that's one issue. And another issue is that it was quite a harsh milieu in the black metal scene in the early 90s. In that regard, if you copied some band, if somebody took you in copying another band, you will be kicked out of the scene, You will be called a poser and a fucking ripoff, and, your name would be spread in the underground. You would be kicked out of the scene. And so I guess that also made you kind of, and as long as you believed in that mindset as well, it made you kind of dig really deep to kind of find what your sound was, and you could really hear it, it can tie into Emperor's kind of sound in the Ninth Side Eclipse. That's quite tied to where they come from in Norway, and the kind of the scenery there, and how it looks in Telemark, and it brings those feelings and those emotions, and like myself, after I matured, it was important for me also to bring in my Indian influences and stuff like that. So I think as long as all we guys from the early 90s, we kind of wanted to be egomaniacs in a way, and focus the music internally, try to put a dagger inside your heart, but the dagger has a speaker on it, and the speaker kind of plays the music from your heart, and that was the mindset. And I think that really affected the music profoundly, in the sense that we made at that time really evocative music without really having any skills, which is really, really impressive in itself.
Yes, especially because I've noticed in the melodies, I mean, what really sets Norway apart from let's say, the Swedish scene is the Swedish scene seems to be all based on this sort of scalar, they're all playing a harmonic minor scale kind of riff, and the Norwegian black metal, it would go from the sort of minor, but you would shift up maybe chromatically, and it would just give it this darker tone.
Yeah, I think, that's probably also a cultural reason, because Sweden has always been a really big music country. You have the States, obviously, and Great Britain and Germany. But besides them, Sweden is probably one of the biggest music industries in the world, with all their kind of big rock bands and like Roxette and all their big pop artists through all the years. Whereas in Norway, if you compare it, we really didn't have any of that, So I guess that if you're a death metal band living in Sweden, you probably live around the kind of great distributions for music, great music studios, people who know to market and merchandise, etc., etc. Whereas if you lived in Norway, you had nothing of that, because Norway wasn't a music country. We had Aha, and that was it, And I think that also kind of affected us as young people to not to be distracted by external issues, because that didn't pertain to us anyway. There was no industry in Norway. We had an underground, and we were proud of it. And in order to keep the underground alive, you had to make up words like true and stuff like that. It has to be honest. If you change the word true to honest, it gets a higher meaning.
Yeah. And I mean, like you were saying earlier, when you were all starting, you didn't have the Dark Thrones and everything to copy like the 2000s black metal bands. So I think everyone had a sort of outside influence from somewhere else that they brought in, and which made it, the burgeoning scene very diverse.
Yeah, that's why, I kind of like to separate like the genre black metal into kind of two genres. For me, there's one black metal that pertains to the early 90s to mid 90s, and then everything after that is kind of post black metal.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm saying that is because the black metal that happened in the 90s, that was kind of the definition. That's what defined it in the first place. And then post black metal is the generation that it's kind of copying that. I'm not saying they're not original bands these days. There are, but now they kind of everybody in the post black metal scene, they kind of have a template to work from.
Yeah.
And so I usually don't regard, to say it a bit creatively is that black metal isn't really a genre. It's a few individuals placed in a space and time. So black metal is really people that lived and breathed in the early 90s. Whether it was Rotting Christ in Greece or Samael in Switzerland or Dark Throne here in Norway. That is black metal. Those people. And everything after that, post black metal, is the musical genre that stemmed out of the black metal people.
Yeah. And I mean, the newer scenes, you always get a band going, like in the style of true Norwegian black metal, and it just sounds like Dark Throne.
Yeah.
So everyone's taken that sound and just applied it to Norwegian black metal.
Yeah. I guess for something to be true, it has to be something that's happening then and there, like a revolution of sorts. If you think about punk rock as well, in the late 60s or whatever, and obviously it's not the same thing doing a punk band in 2021. It doesn't have the same connotations. You're borrowing a style, you're borrowing the music style, but everything else is not the same, So maybe the notes are the same, and maybe kind of you choose to dress up as your idols. That you can, but that's a simulation of sorts, And it's the same thing with black metal, like the kind of the truest form of black metal is when it also was surrounded with cultural turmoil, when it was in the fire, so to speak. Today, it's a genre that has a lot of other opportunities. I guess like a black metal band that's starting up today, they will inadvertently think also that getting a record deal is a possibility. Playing festivals is a possibility, So they also have that to consider. I'm not bashing it. I'm not trying to be negative towards it. I'm just saying it's not the same.
It's a different sort of field nowadays.
Yeah, it's part of the music industry nowadays. It wasn't no part of music industry before. Yeah, we played music, but we weren't part of the music industry.
Yeah, it's sort of like the you were talking about punk, but you got your punk rock movement in the late 60s, 70s, whatever, and then you had your sort of street hardcore punk movement in the late 70s, early 80s, where you got bands like Discharge and Exploited and all of that going, and they were a bunch of youths angry with the system, unemployed. It was that era of turmoil for them, and that's where that was born from. Exactly,
and I think that stems true for a lot of genres, all the genres that kind of came from the streets, I guess. Like beat, black metal, which really is born in our basements. None of us, we didn't get encouragements from our parents. They said, what the fuck are you doing? They didn't say, oh, how nice you're playing, there wasn't anything like that. Nobody where you lived understood what the hell you were doing, And so be it black metal or rap music, which is also born in, somebody's basement with a drum machine and, like a homemade kind of a sampler, and it's put together and they created this special, art form,
Yeah.
And rap music has also gone down the same kind of line, like starting, in a poor family's basement into being a multi-million industry, like a lot bigger than black metal. But extreme metal also has moved into the era of being, a shop or an industry, something you can possibly make money on, play festivals, go party, and all these connotations also changes what the genre is within its own nature.
Yeah, because a lot of bands are able to support themselves just by playing shows.
Yeah, exactly. And also, when somebody wants to play in an extreme metal band today, I guess it's easier to get encouragement from your teachers and from your parents and all that, because now they know about these styles and they know that, Metallica sold 20 million albums and that death metal does really well. They don't like the music, but now at least they understand it, So even you as a kid, nowadays you'll probably have a lot more encouragement doing what you're doing. So it's kind of moving into the kind of the hobby area. It's something extracurricular you can pick up and do. Whereas when we started doing this, you were crazy. If you did this, you were fucking crazy. And most of us coming from small cities around Norway, everybody was kind of an outcast, frozen out, no friends. And, we had friends, but not many. But a lot of us chose it. And that's also another factor, it's kind of choosing to be an outsider and being proud of it, owning it instead of, feeling sorry for yourself or whatever. And then making something out of that seclusion, that time to think, by yourself, and yeah, so it was a very interesting time.
Yeah, no, I mean, I wish I was around in that sort of scene and area just to see a sort of movement like that happen. And fortunately,
Yeah,
I was born in the
sorry, when were you born?
In the late 80s. So
Yeah,
you know, I didn't get to experience it to that full extent, but we still had the a few things like, you know, to find new bands, you had to read the booklets to find what bands those bands listened to, because you wanted to, because the internet wasn't such a big thing then. So
no, exactly. And whether you're born yesterday or 40, 50 years ago, it doesn't really matter. It's still an interesting history, you know.
Yeah.
I wasn't around in the Second World War, but I'm still able to kind of link to it by you know, by film, by books, by, you know, by the records that's kept, you know. So it's also attainable to somebody else, you know. And I think the most important lesson learned in kind of all these genres we are talking about, be it punk or black metal or rap music, is that I guess what we want is the birth of some new tension, you know, somebody new style that grows out of something that was initially created, that it can give birth or create something new.
Yeah.
And I guess that's something that every artist wants to aspire to, you know, be part of something, a creation that also has the ability to inspire and recreate.
Yeah, or create something more personal to you. I mean, you can still work inside a genre, but you can add elements around you. I mean, if you come from a harsh area or harsher country, you know, it might inspire you to make it more violent, or, you know, just aesthetically relating to that sort of thing.
Yeah, like I said a couple of times earlier, like the really true black metal people of today, they are the guys living in, you know, Iran and parts of Africa and stuff like that, and you know, and they hide their T-shirts, you know, and they arrange shows hiddenly for the government, you know, and if somebody finds out, they will all be arrested and thrown to prison, you know. That's kind of the new black metal, you know. That
yeah, I'd actually love to hear bands coming from that sort of. There doesn't seem to be a lot of them operating.
No, of course, you know, because they have to be crazy to do it, and like it's the same thing, you know, like on another scale, of course, but it's the same thing in Norway. When we started, you know, Norway was quite a conservative country, you know, like not like a American conservatism or Muslim conservatism, but it had its own form of conservatism. We've often been called the last communist state of Europe, you know, and so Norway had quite a special culture, you know, before the oil and before the riches and before being kind of part of the international community. You know, everybody thought of Norway as the capital of Sweden when we grew up. So nobody outside Scandinavia had really kind of any grasp of what Norway was, you know. So there was a lot of tension here. And so, you know, like seeing that black metal and death metal or any style of music that's not accepted in a conservative country, that, you know, that we have been part and managed to inspire that cultural revolt, you know, like people using art and music in order to promote their own freedom. That's really inspiring.
Yeah, and it definitely is. And I mean, when we were talking earlier about outside music, you know, your classical influences and that, I mean, how important do you think it is to have those outside influences when you're creating something?
Sorry, I didn't understand the question.
When we were talking earlier about outside music, your classical influences and whatnot, how important do you think it is to have sort of lots of different outside influences when you're creating your art? I mean,
yeah, for me, it's been alpha omega. I'm not saying it has to be that for everybody else, but if you're playing in a rock and roll band and you're in it for the fun of it, and it's cool to meet the guys twice a week and doing a show here and there, and that's fine too, whatever makes you happy. But for me, it's always been really important to have a lot of outside influences, and it doesn't really have to be music either, because I'm trying, and probably more people than me, but we're trying to kind of express something that's not that easily said, that you can't really express this in a conversation. You're not really sure how to tell it to yourself either, so you kind of picked up an instrument in relation to see if it's easier translatable in that sense, because I can't write it like in a book form. I can't speak it, so the outside influences that helps me kind of getting inspiration to what I'm going to try to picture and what I'm going to try to say,
Yeah, definitely. I mean, on the Supervillain Outcast album, that was so wildly different from that style you had established on Satanic Art and the 666 International. It was almost, I don't want to say a more mainstream sound, but it was more sort of a pop structured type of thing. I mean, what was your decision to go with that? The influences?
I've always been a big sucker for pop music. Always, not all pop music. Most pop music is horrible, but like when pop music is really good, it's really good. And you know why? Because it's done in 3 minutes. It's mostly 3 chords, and it still shines through to be great, and making interesting music in a simple way, using simple tools, it's really fucking difficult. So I have a huge respect for pop music when they hit the nail on the head, because it's probably one of the most difficult things to do, to narrow a thing down, layer by layer, just narrowing it down to the bone, but then the bone is enough. Doesn't need any more meat. So I've always been a really sucker for pop music. You're actually the first guy that's ever compared it to pop music. So that was quite cool, actually, because pop music was a lot in my mind. But it also has the contrast in sense that it is a very brutal album. Even the softer songs are really, really hard songs, and the notes are very hard, and there's not a lot of melody. And there's so it's a contrast there as well. You kind of I was kind of bringing in the harshness from the kind of the verse section of extreme metal, and then combining it with the simplicity of pop music, I guess. Yeah, you're right. It was my commercial moment, but I knew it wouldn't fly. I knew it wouldn't. Because nobody really wanted that structured music from us. So I knew that on its own is going to be quite an original release, because it will be the only release in our discography that is like that,
Yeah, because it really stands out.
Yeah, it stands out. And a funny thing about it is that it doesn't represent the normal narrative as well. When you release a record like that, you would expect that the next record is going to be like even a bigger production, even more commercial, and now they're going for it. But instead you got the Umbra. So it's quite fun also placing that Supervillain Outcast record in the midst there, that, in some sort of way. It makes no business sense, it makes no sense whatsoever. So but the reason it makes no sense is that it's we're just doing what we feel like, instead of kind of being and going back to being overly distracted by opportunity.
Yeah. Because, I mean, comparisons again, sonically, it kind of reminded me, because it was still experimental and still weird. It reminds me in terms of pop music of, let's say, Kate Bush.
Yeah, I'm a big Kate Bush fan, so thank you. Yeah, you know, they have a really interesting artist. You know, when she becomes successful in a traditional kind of music industry, but being untraditional. You know, bringing her dance background and her more classical orientation. She's one of those interesting artists that actually brings complexity into pop music.
Yeah.
But she does so smoothly that the person listening to it doesn't even notice the complexity.
Yeah,
so for most part, yeah, because for most people, complex music will be difficult to listen to. That's why if you give the straightest guy you give him a Cannibal Corpse CD, he won't hear the melodies, he won't hear anything, he would just hear the noise. So you have to be trained. You have to spend a lot of years, getting to know how to decipher complicated music. And that's fascinating with Kate Bush, that she kind of made complicated pop music and people didn't notice that it was complicated. They just enjoyed it.
Yeah, because it still had very hummable sort of melodies. And
yeah, if you take the ground notes of her music, it's simple. But if you add on her vocal melodies, now you're getting into quite a huge complexity. Not only tonally her vocals, but also rhythmically in relation to the ground notes and the ground beat. But it's very, very cleverly done.
Yeah, and she almost managed to create a narrative within that sort of cyclic repetition, with sort of, she would layer different melodies on top of it. So when that that sort of second verse or whatever comes back, it's got an extra little layer just there.
Exactly. That's really cool. I think that, her era, like the 80s era of pop music, is really the golden era of pop music. Obviously, you have a lot of shit there as well, but like the 70s and the 80s, then you have like artists like Kate Bush and David Bowie, and even like an artist like George Michael, that is really thoroughly solid, and Michael Jackson. If you think about it, there's really no artist out there that sounds remotely like Michael Jackson. So you had all these artists coming along from the 70s and spilling into the 80s that really brought their personal kind of stamp on their music.
Yeah,
and I think that's a bit gone today. I think a few pop musicians has been good at bringing back the live shows, like an artist like Beyonce, that you did big productions again in pop music. Like in the 90s, pop music was basically reduced to playback, and the singer standing alone on a stage and maybe a few dancers and stuff like that. So it's encouraging to see like artists like Beyonce having 50 people on stage playing instruments. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and a lot of good solid musicians, guitarists and whatnot play for some pop artists.
Yeah. It's quite interesting. A lot of like the good, like really thorough pop artists of today, their live shows are a lot better than their records, actually. So but it's also an industry thing. The reason why it's become that and a renewed focus on the stage is that there's no money in product anymore.
Yeah.
So at some point, the pop artists, leaving the 90s and into the 2000s, they a lot of pop artists went from selling, millions of records into selling like a couple of 100,000 units. So a lot of artists, they lost millions. So that made a new focus on the live stage, like, because where the money had shifted basically.
Yeah. And that also just brings to mind this sort of unified sound that we're talking about in metal earlier. Everyone wants to sound like this artist or that artist, and you have these guys in metal going, oh, you're not true because you don't sound like Dark Throne and only listen to this necro cult black metal and that, where a lot of the guys from your era, as you know, were listening to Dead Can Dance and bands like that.
Yeah. Everybody I knew back then, of course, black metal, that was our life,
Yeah.
But then our music collection, it also reflected other parts of our life, earlier life, and what we grew up on, and most people my age, they also had parents that listened to records, had a record player. So I grew up with a record player in the living room, and a father and a mother buying vinyls and stuff like that. So I think a lot of people from my generation gets into that passion from music really easily because it's really close by. It's in the living room while you're growing up, Your father suddenly turns off the TV, and he goes to the record shelves and he takes out a vinyl and he puts it on and he closes his eyes and tilts his head up and he expresses like, oh, this is so good, and he goes sit down. It's quite powerful when you're growing up, you're seeing that effect on music, So I remember my father playing me Pink Floyd, and I got the chills. The music scared me. That was my first musical experience outside music that wants to make you dance or make you happy. That was I was immersed in it,
Yeah.
And Dark Side of the Moon, So it was all, I remember it today as a trip. I tripped into the record, and it showed me all these sorts of, layers and emotions and dark rooms and light rooms and all that stuff, So it's quite a powerful experience. And I think, I think most people my age into music grew up similarly to that or somewhat like that,
Yeah, it's funny you should say that, because when I was a kid in the sort of early 90s, mid 90s, TV was terrible. There was maybe an hour a day or something that you could watch TV, but like you say, there was music. There was always music in the car. There was, So I guess sort of newer generations maybe don't have that, or some probably do. I'm sure some people
I guess
experience it.
It inadvertently have to come back because it can only get so much Netflix, and so much playing games on your mobile phone. And, as soon as that becomes your reality, then it becomes a prison, Now it's still cool because it's pretty new to access like a million movies on your phone, but at some point down the line, I think people will just call that reality. And for most part, like a mundane reality sucks, and you want to reach out and touch something different. So, I think like art forms, like any art form for that matter, it will be something people will always come back to because it has timeless meaning, because it connects to the essential humanness in us all, whereas everything we do on Netflix and on Facebook and stuff like that, that's just killing time. It's just entertainment, So it's for most of the time it isn't even real. It doesn't pertain to you other than being, not being bored. As soon as that bores you, as soon as that kind of is not doing for you anymore what is there for, then you'll have to move out, and explore.
Yeah, watch a series and then move on. Whereas you buy an album and you can listen to that anytime.
Yeah. The pandemic is showing that as well. It's so easily now, like here in Norway, everything is closed, on a national level. So everybody's just sitting at home. And, Netflix won't do. You can only watch so much Netflix, So I'm talking to a lot of people, like people are bored out of their minds now. So so they have to shift that somewhere. They can't shift it back to the thing they got bored with to begin with. So they have to shift it somewhere else, And for some people, that can mean that picking up a book again, just reading a great book or something like that, For me, it means like pushing me back into writing lyrics and making music and killing the restlessness with something substantial rather than just something that kills time.
Yeah. And I mean, speaking of lyrics, Ved Buens Ende, everything's in Norwegian. What was your decision to go with the mother tongue?
Yeah, one thing is kind of, and this is the least important factor, but one factor is the tie to Ved Buens Ende and Håvard and Ulver.
Yeah.
So that's one kind of lineage that kind of I chose deliberately to continue in a way. And then also because I never wrote in Norwegian before, and I wanted the lyrics to be very kind of pompous.
Yeah.
And I think pomposity, it sounds a bit stupid in English, but it sounds really great in Norwegian. It has that, like really solemn feel to it. So that's also why I chose the Norwegian language to kind of to achieve that grandeur or pomposity. And as more I got into it, writing in Norway, the more I got to kind of enjoy it, and it also gave me, at the end, I really feel like now that it's ended up being a form of expression that's a lot more naked and closer to home. So what I discovered in this process is that my lyrics are probably a lot more honest in Norwegian than in English. In English, I embellish them because English has so many words, and and you have all this rich history, with the poets, be it Byron or Shakespeare or whatnot, So I feel like using English is a way to conceal. And that's great if that's a tool you want, like if you want to write really mystical lyrics, for example, the English language, especially if you're not English yourself, then it's that's one layer of concealment already,
Yeah.
If you're a Norwegian and writing lyrics, now you're on the first level of concealment, and then you can use the language itself to do so even further. But so I really enjoyed the nakedness of just using my mother tongue, and I it was almost feeling like getting to the core of things, instead of tiptoeing around them, So I found out I really enjoyed writing in Norwegian. So I'm going to continue with that in Doldvold project for sure.
Yeah, because it definitely gives it a great deal of authenticity. Just
it's easier also to kind of live out the expression, because you're kind of living out the expression as you would do in your normal life. Because if I'm standing in my kitchen and feeling really angry, I won't say fuck. I would say helvete.
Yeah.
So it's easy, it just feels more natural in the sense that you're kind of accessing a language that's directly tied into your emotions already. Whereas English, being a second language, is something you translate on the way. You know, you're thinking in Norwegian, translate it to English, and then it comes out of your mouth. So yeah, I think it was a very, very nice learning experience in how to start writing really honestly.
Yeah. And I mean, yeah, expression is important, especially because vocally you sound very expressive on the EP.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you know, and to tie those together to get a more authentic kind of expression, you have to kind of feel what you're saying. And I guess I do that in English as well, but now it came even one notch closer because it's not that concealed or clothed, you know, like it's just bare to the bone. Kind of, there's no, maybe there's problem understanding completely what a lyric's about if you read it, like what's it about, or what's my concern here. But it's not difficult deciphering every sentence or word, you know. They're very direct and very kind of raw.
Yeah. And sonically, I mean, musically, the band is also, it's not what we were talking about earlier, the straight ahead Norwegian black metal. I mean, there's a lot of acoustic parts and sort of one stage kind of Spanish-esque melodies and that sort of stuff. I mean, it's also goes through a lot of different sounds.
Yeah, what I really enjoy about Ved Buens Ende is that it's really a band that's really the sum of its parts, because not every single riff is great, or, you know, not every drum part is really inventive, or it's original. So I guess even if you take out all the parts and put them on their own, nothing is really original there. But when you put them all together, it has quite a unique sound, you know.
Yeah, it works. It's got lots of, because I mean, on the first track you start off of the EP, you start off with a very sort of, after the intro, it's this very punk sort of riff, and then it goes through these stages where it goes into more kind of melodic black metal kind of territory.
Yeah, I guess Håvard is quite rooted in those. But, you know, it was a fun re-experience for me as well, you know, in the sense that, melodic black metal is kind of an era I never got to do, because by the time we got the record deals and stuff like that, I was really tired about that style, you know. Like I already abandoned it, you know. So I never came to express that. At some point, you know, everybody played really, really melodic black metal, like before we released records and stuff like that. I remember talking to Fenris, you know, and Fenris around Transylvanian Hunger record. After it was released, he said something like, because he wasn't, you know, like, like say the year before Transylvanian Hunger was released, he wasn't really sociable. Nobody knew where he was, and he didn't speak to anybody, you know. Like, if you think about it, all his friends had been arrested. It was big turmoil in the black metal scene and stuff like that. So he said when he released Transylvanian Hunger, he thought it was a really original record, because he didn't know that everybody else was playing like that as well. Like he honestly didn't know. So I think most of us played that style at some point, but like me, for example, I never got to release an album that reflected kind of that period. So having the opportunity now with Doldvorde, which has those parts, it felt really at home. It was really easy to sink into, you know, because it's that familiarness of coming home.
Yeah. And the new material, is it sort of similar to the EP?
Not really. It's I'm not saying it's drastically that different either. You know, you will hear riffs that are quite similar, but I think the biggest difference between the EP and the album is that the EP was really intense. Yeah. I mean, it's not like 250, 300 BPMs or whatever, but you know, it's a good tempo. It's probably a more intense tempo than the higher speeds, because as you approach to the even higher speed, it all goes so fast. It's more fluent. So in a way, it's more hard hitting. It's like Slayer, you know. Slayer isn't particularly fast, but it's quite brutal. You know, it's very aggressive music. You know.
Yeah.
So the EP, I find it really intense, and my vocal delivery also helps. You know, with the desperation and the, you know, like the inner turmoil and the poet in hell kind of thing. You know, and the album is really not. The album is really not intense at all. So I guess that's the biggest difference. So when you start out that will obviously also change everything else, you know?
Yeah.
But it's still very much the same band, you know? It's not like if you listen to it, you won't kind of... It will still be recognizable, you know? Like, you'll still hear it's this band. It's just a bit of a different take on it, you know? And I don't know if maybe that was a bit coincidental that we just ended up with a lot less faster songs, and then, you know, because we never made any plan for it. We just made the songs and then we recorded them, and it is what it is. But I'm very, very satisfied with the album. I think it's worth being on an album. I think the EP was great as well, but for me, that's kind of our presentation, kind of a glorified demo of sorts. You know, here we are. So and I think we really kind of defined our sound a lot more. We found our footing and our place, in the sense that we developed points on the EP, and then other issues on the EP were kind of thrown out, you know, and will only be part of the EP. So I think like also the EP is very haphazardly put together, in the sense that Håvard and Kai just started playing around one night, you know, in the basement, just made a song for fun. And that's the punk song. And that's why that song really sticks out in relation to all the songs that comes after it, because it was never intended for something. It was just intended for, you know, two guys having a drink. So at that point, it wasn't even a band, you know. And then they continued doing the songs, and at some point it was like, yeah, maybe we should do something of this. And they came to me and they asked if I could consider contributing and stuff like that. So it kind of grew as it went along. So I would say, like, on the EP, the style of Dold isn't really defined yet. So we came further into that definition of what Dold is on the album.
Yeah, more like finding your sound on the EP. And
yeah, I guess more like exploring sound on the EP and then defining it on the album.
Yeah,
you know, making it more solid.
And going back to Doradom, I mean, you being half North Indian, is it quite a bit of an Indian influence? I mean, even aesthetically, your, let's say, corpse paint is sort of the a gory monk look.
Yeah, and you know, I'm not saying it will stay that way, you know. And I think I made that point like really clear by now, that a band doesn't have to be a band, you know. It can change around. It can change around visually. That, you know, it makes me sometimes when I go to a show and then 10 years later I go to the same band and it's still just treading down the same part. Obviously they're happy there, so That's fine, you know, but I don't see that for me. So I think like a band doesn't have to be defined by anything really. But going back to what I think your question is, yeah, I like to tie in the Indian kind of roots here and there as well, you know. And I think like inadvertently, my Norwegian side is already presented because I'm doing musical style that kind of, it wasn't born in Norway, but it kind of grew to new heights here. So it's only fair that my other side also get a kind of a portion of it. But I also think it's very interesting to kind of draw on that experience and that background, in the sense that I did also grow up some portion of my life in India. And, you know, my father was an Indian, so I grew up with the Indian food and the Indian movies and the Indian music and, you know, carpets on the walls and stuff like that, you know. So it's also important for me to kind of add that aspect into the art I'm trying to make. And that's purposely so that art can be more honest as well. So it's less niche and more tied to the people performing it, you know.
Yeah, it's not just you trying to bring in some sort of eclectic influence to show how arty you are or something.
No, you know, yeah. I would feel really, really silly if I stood there in that white paint and the Indian T-shirt and stuff and had no connection to India whatsoever, you know. But like I said, it will probably change around. I will probably change my attire again. I changed my makeup and stuff a million times. Sometimes we have also done a tour where we didn't use makeup at all. It just doesn't have to be fixed, you know. It's, you know, in the end, if you kind of fix all that to a certain state, now kind of the image is owning you. You are not owning the image. You're kind of putting on a uniform that owns you, you know. So I kind of want to avoid that, you know, even if it costs me commercially or financially, or it makes it difficult to get into this band because you can't really follow where it tread. Well, okay, that's okay, you know, because that's not my focus. My focus is kind of telling my story, you know. Now I released my first record when I was 16 years old. I'll probably release my last one a few years before I die, and therein you have the whole story, you know. There you have it all. There's my life, and that's my kind of my goal, my point.
Yeah, maintaining your artistic integrity.
Yeah, I don't like that sentence, but yeah, in essence, that because it's so misused, the artistic integrity part.
Oh yeah, no, it's very overused these days.
But you know, it's an honest thing. I don't have to be artsy fartsy either, you know. It's just whatever kind of is the right thing at the right moment, you know. And every time you kind of open your eyes and there's a potential new kind of things happening to you. Maybe you're having a bad day. Once you wore a diaper and shit your pants, you know, and hopefully you're not doing that anymore. So a big portion of your life, you're at school, you know, surrounded by all these people and teachers like yelling at you and trying to show you things you're not ready for, and then you pass on to another kind of era of your life, you know, maybe moving away from home from the first time, or going to school in some strange city, you know, and then you start earning money, you start traveling, and, you know, all the time you're also feeding yourself by friendships and experiences and books you read and all that stuff, you know. So I think that's essentially who you are, you know, that line, that your linear line of development and how far you come in your life, you know. And that's kind of what I want to portray in music. So whether it's artsy or not artsy or whatever, it just depends on kind of where is the mindset right now and what is the mood. and what's important to you right now. What's the stuff you want to get out of your chest? What's kind of the unspoken language right now? What's worrying you the most? And I think that the reason why the attraction of dwelling into dark topics is more interesting is because, like, being happy and being content, that's an experience thing. That's something you want to experience, not something you want to write about. So if you're happy and you're content on just being in that state. So then you don't have to perform. You don't have to make art, So the artistic side is also to kind of reach that happiness or that contentment, So you're doing it through expression, express the things you can't really grasp at the moment, or you can't reach it,
Yeah, because I mean, like you say, a vehicle of expression, but also I don't want to say therapeutically, but to sort of.
But it is.
But to get rid of negative emotion through, let's say, art.
Yeah, get rid of them, enjoy them, celebrate them. I think, if you have a nagging, this is a very easy example, but if you're having a really unsettling feeling inside your body, and writing or making notes, putting notes together can make you experience that emotion that's really negative in your body in a way that you can see it, understand it, and enjoy it. That's just a positive. So enjoying a negative at that point is a positive experience.
Yeah, and which is what I think most art is born from.
Yeah, if everything is fine, there's nothing to write about. Who would want to read it?
Yeah.
If I wrote you like a letter, yeah, everything's fine right now. We went skiing. It was so much fun. We're going home to make you the best dinner in the world right now. It's going to be great. It's there's nothing to learn from that. Of course, if you read that, you could be happy for me, but that's the extent of what it will give you. Like you won't grow from it. You won't understand something about yourself. You won't learn anything new about me, other than that I ski and I eat food, like which isn't important anyway. So obviously the interesting side of art is dwelling on the more kind of hidden esoteric sides of your human nature, because we do hide all the time, even the simplest stuff, when you're at the toilet, and you're washing your hands and you're looking yourself in the mirror and you're doing the grimaces, and smiling and doing funny faces towards yourself. That's sort of a hidden life in itself, because obviously you wouldn't go out to the dinner table with your family and act like that,
Yeah.
Or when you're like by yourself and you're watching porn or whatever, So we live secret lives all the time. Of course, these are very, very, very concrete examples, but and these secret lives, they also go deeper, have more levels than doing grimaces or secretly watching porn or farting in private and stuff like that. But it just goes to show that we kind of have a persona which is made up. And it's not false. It's not false in the sense that it's made up. It's made up to function.
Yeah.
But then you also have a truer personality, which it's not really established to function. It just is what it is.
Yeah.
So it's not really viable by itself to be that, that kind of that quintessential self. So you need the persona, but in order to kind of make the persona better and better and better, you need to know the quintessential parts of yourself.
Yeah, you can't go out in public and do the things that you would probably think or do in private. Like you say, You need to function in the said society.
Yeah, and it's a social thing as well. I talk differently with my friends than my mother. I talk differently to my child, you know, and you know, so it's all compartmentalized, you know, and it has to be like that. But since everything is like that for so much of your life, you also need to kind of reach those states of mind and states of emotion that's just pure self at sometimes. And art and music, I don't know, dancing, painting, sculpturing, all these are means and tools to do so, you know, because you go to work every day, and at work you have a persona, and you go home and you are with your family, and that's your family persona. You go out, have a few beers with the guys, that's your kind of be with the guys persona. So in the end, you have to leave on one part that's just for yourself as well. And I guess I feel sorry for those people who doesn't really have that, you know, doesn't have that outlet. And for me, that's music. That's music and writing lyrics. That's how I connect with it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's a perfect example of sort of living through art.
Yeah, I'm not living through it.
Not living through art, but expression.
But yeah, and I would be kind of dead without it. That's the point. It's kind of keeping me alive, you know, and it's also feeding all these aspects of my persona, you know, or my different personas are also getting richer because of it, you know, is learning them something about, you know, their inner self, you know, where it all derives from, you know. And it can also be like a moral and an ethical thing, and how your personas in social life chooses to interact with the society around you, you know. And I think a lot of people, there are a lot of examples of people that are really lost, you know, going into schools and shooting people, you know, people killing in the name of God and stuff like that. That's people who never kind of had that inner outlet onto themselves, you know, but they needed it so much. They were impressionable for some outside influence to kind of take them over, like parasite, you know, and the parasite, when it takes over, suddenly you're doing its bidding.
Yeah, and they, like you say, it's just sort of they don't have that outlet, so they consistently living or trying to live within this persona, but they can't get it out somehow, and then they end up just snapping and going on a rampage or something like that.
Yeah,
because they can't properly express themselves, I guess.
Yeah, I guess they either lost themselves at some point, and or they never found themselves. And I guess if something's awakened, if there's nobody in there, that means something or somebody can move in. You know, if there's a vacancy there, you know, if there's a void in there, that void can be filled.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people also, unfortunately, cling to subcultures because they're trying to fill that void, but then they end up sort of expressing themselves in the wrong way.
Yeah, I guess we all been through that some way or another, you know, trying to find our footing, you know, like, and I guess we always, all of us has, for example, been envious of somebody else for the wrong reasons. You know, being envious at somebody because they're popular, for example, or if you're really young, being envious at somebody because they have a toy that you don't have, and stuff like that. So, you know, these emotions aren't false; they are true emotions, but you haven't learned to deal with them yet. You know, and you know, finding some sort of purpose or anchoring, like music is for me, is a way to kind of also take a step back and you know, knowing how to deal with true emotion that potentially can have a dire outcome, you know.
Yeah.
And I can put it into expression instead, you know, like, and And also having a platform where you're kind of allowed to explore these emotions, because if you gone into kind of a subculture thing or religious thing, there will be rules, and these rules are kind of also detrimental to your own development, I guess. Like if you're a Christian, there are dogmas there. If you're a Muslim, there are similar and different dogmas there. But there's even rules in subcultures, you know, like subcultural, like youth kind of cultural groups also have their own rules, you know. Like we in the black metal scene, we also had our rules.
Yeah.
No trends, no posers, no fun, no this, no that, you know. And I remember I didn't watch comedies because I wasn't supposed to laugh, and stuff like that, you know. And you know, I always sat in a candlelit room. I didn't have a light bulb, and you know, so your parents, they're wondering what the fuck's up with you, you know. Like your room is painted black, you're just listening to noise the whole day, you're sitting in candlelight, they're seeing books on your table with really dark titles and stuff like that. Obviously they probably were worried at some point, you know?
Yeah, probably think you about to do something dangerous, like shoot up a school. Or
yeah, I guess it had the opposite effect, you know. Like instead of creating anger, the anger was already there, I guess. So instead of creating it, it really subdued it, because I guess for me, I chose the right channels. I chose the right boxes to put what was already there into, if
yeah,
you know what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah. You
Because
you channeled it the way that it needed to be channeled, I guess.
Yeah, I get, you know, like being quite young, I was struck with depression at quite a young age, you know. So choosing all, you know, choosing the right music for it to listen to, I mean, and choosing the right literature and your own surrounding that made you feel comfortable, even if it was black walls and a candlelight, that really made, like I said, it made me pick up the right boxes to put that kind of state of depression into and understand it better. So I made it comfortable for me, even though from the outside it looked like hell, you know. It looked like, what the fuck are you doing? But in my inner room, like my mind space, I built comfort, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the comfort you sort of surround yourself in. I mean, some people find comfort in, you know, pink fluffy bunnies or something like that, and that's great for them. But I suppose,
I guess if you're happy, that's great.
yeah. But I suppose, you know, most of us that are into extreme music, we gravitate towards it because we find something real in it. We find a real sort of comfort in it that we can relate to on a certain level.
Yeah, and you know, because it's already there, you know, both on the inside and the outside. You know, it's an inherent part of nature, for one thing, like your own nature. And then on the other side, even though nobody has shown you yet, there are all these dark shit in the world, you know. Like even though if you're secluded from it, it's already there. So opening that passage isn't really showing you something that necessarily is you. It's just showing you something that is there. And that also enables you to kind of take a stance in relation to it and, you know, learn it, you know. And I think, you know, and this is a slippery slope. I have a kid myself, you know, like how much of the world are you supposed to show at any given time? You know, there's an appropriate amount for a kid to learn. So even in our childhood, we were also secluded from parts, you know, like of the world that were already there. and I guess like death metal for me, or thrash metal, stuff like that kind of opened those doors. And those doors, the thrash metal doors and the death metal doors, that open doors to lyrics. If you found out like, Nocturnal's lyrics are really inspired by H.P. Lovecraft. Oh, what's H.P. Lovecraft? Yeah, find out, go borrow his book. And then you borrowed the book, and that led you somewhere else, So, you're chasing the rabbit down the hole suddenly.
Yeah. It's just funny talking about that, when you were saying, you didn't watch comedies because of no fun and no trends and everything. It's also when you first sort of getting into extreme metal, and there's all these classics that people dump on you, and if you don't like some of these classics, then there's something wrong with you because you're supposed to like them. And I mean, nowadays, the older you get and when you listen to it, you kind of say, well, I don't really like that album, so I'm not going to listen to it.
Exactly. No, I think, it's inadvertently, you will be affected on your path to kind of being free in the sense, you will give into stuff like not watching comedies and not doing it for a while. That's really what teaches you that you don't really give a fuck anymore. I'll watch comedies if I want, or I'll dislike that classic record if I want. It doesn't really matter. So I guess, even if whatever you choose, there will be a good and bad aspect of it. But I guess the main reason is how you get out of it, not necessarily how you got into it.
Yeah. And it all forms part of your path, your journey to wherever you want to go.
Yeah.
And are we getting a new Doradom album anytime soon?
I finished the pre-production. I'm currently recording vocals for it, and I guess we will book the studio for the drum recordings quite shortly. But the pandemic is also getting in the way, because it's making it difficult to arrange rehearsals and stuff like that, especially when we are in certain regional lockdowns and stuff like that. Then we can't really travel. Sometimes we don't give a fuck, but on the other hand, there's also a few of us or people surrounding us that is in the health sector, and don't want to make life miserable for them either. But so it's going slower than, like, the portion that's collective. It's going slower than I would want it to. But the portion that's only reliant on me, that's going fine. Like the making of the songs and the pre-productions and also doing the vocals. So I guess there will be a new Dødheimsgard album finished during this year. I'm pretty sure.
Oh, that's great. And Eldrin, he's just concentrating on Urov.
I don't know. Maybe he's concentrating on Thorns as well. I don't know, but he will not do the vocals for the next Dødheimsgard album. No.
Okay. You say Thorns. Is Thorns making a new album?
Aren't they always?
the Thorns Limited stuff.
Yeah, aren't they always making the record year after year, making the next record? Yeah, I'm pretty sure they're still working on it. Not every day, obviously, but now and then, and Urar and stuff like that. But it's probably for him as for everybody else right now, that band activity is quite limited because of the external limitations.
Yeah.
So sometimes, we don't practice for months because there's no reason to practice right now, because there's nothing to practice for, basically. So everybody can just sit at home and practice instead.
Yeah. And
so I think, a lot of bands are in that situation.
Definitely. And Ved Buens Ende? anything new?
Yeah, I guess when I finish the Dødheimsgard album, then I'll move along to Ved Buens Ende. And I also have a few other projects going, but that's after Ved Buens Ende record.
Because I think a lot of people are looking forward to both Doodsengel and much wanted follow-up. Yeah.
Yeah, Ved Buens Ende record is a very tricky record, Dødheimsgard, it can just be whatever, but I'm not saying I'm indifferent to it, but it really doesn't have any limitations to what, it's not supposed to be anything. It will be whatever it will be. Yeah. Whereas Ved Buens Ende, I feel after so many years, we can't come back and sound like a completely different band. Then it will be purposeless. Then we could as well just play it under another name. I think now we are obliged to follow our history back to where it ended and continue from there. So it's a very difficult record to make in that aspect, that we kind of have to reconnect with our personas from 25 years ago, and for me personally, it won't be worth it if it sounds like something else. If it sounds like some really evolved version that, yeah, man, I can recognize, I hear the Ved Buens and the influences in there. I don't want people to say that. I hear the Ved Buens and the influences in there. It's the Ved Buens Ende. It shouldn't be I hear the influences in there. It should be the totality of it. So it's a very tricky record to make, actually.
Yeah, I can imagine, because you have to get into that mindset of what you were.
Yeah, and also like on a technical level, we developed so much since then, and we got to know much more about music. You have to remember that doing Ved Buens Ende in the beginning, we didn't know shit, and that's why it's so genuine, because we didn't know anything. We didn't know how a studio looked like, or how you recorded an album, or what music composition was, or anything. We just made music, and that's what ended up becoming, so it's a very honest attempt. We didn't have any preconceptions about anything. So now we do. We could wish that we don't have, but we have them, because that's all the experience we have generated since then. So we can't kind of rid ourselves with that, So it's not that easy to just go back there and figuring out how you made that music, without it sounding forced. And it would always be tempting to kind of write something that's closer to you where you're at now. And if obviously we have to do some sort of a combination, but it's very important for me, at least, that we also remember how Written in Water sounds like, so that our next effort doesn't sound like, like a hybrid between Dødheimsgard and Virus, because those are different bands,
Yeah, completely different. And like you say, you don't want to go down that road, because you might as well just change the name then.
Yeah, then it's not the same band. Then it's just the same players taking up the same name as we used 25 years ago. For it to essentially be the same band, it also has to have some sort of linkage to that original expression.
Yeah. Has to have the original sound that you set out.
Yeah, exactly.
And then obviously you want that authenticity as well.
Yeah.
So it's a sort of catch-22. You've got to get it across authentically, but also recapture that.
Yeah, of course, and that's what makes it difficult. Like can we purposely make music like that again by studying what we did and it coming across as an honest effort, or will it sound forced? So that's one dilemma. Another dilemma is just make music, and whatever it sounds like. But then it most probably will sound like another band. So I guess that's the dilemma.
Yeah.
And I think, it wouldn't matter if it sounded like a different band today if we released a few albums since 1995. But I think it's even more important for kind of a reunion 25 years later to make sense. It kind of has to link up where you left.
Yeah, because you didn't continue. I mean, it's not like Doradom where you were making albums all through the years, so your changes didn't really matter.
Exactly. My daughter has started bugging me a bit, so I guess we're at the end.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. Well, thanks a lot for the interview. Thanks for the time that you've given to us.
Thank you. It's been nice talking to you, and we got into some really good subjects, I think.
Definitely. It's a lot of great stuff.
Cool.
Thanks a lot, Yusaf. All right. Thank you, Yusaf.
Bye.
Cheers.